Number. The misconception. The Great Hall of the Galactic Concord stretched for nearly a mile in every direction. Its crystal walls held the light of 3 suns, and its floor was made from stone taken from 47 different worlds. For 12,000 years, this hall had been the center of galactic peace. Every spacefaring species sent their ambassadors here. Every major decision was made within these walls. Ambassador Kethala Voran of the Thesari Dominion walked to the speaking platform. Her blue skin shimmered under the lights. Her 4 eyes blinked in sequence as she looked across the gathered representatives. She was about to present her findings on humanity. The newest member of the Concord, distinguished members of the Council, she began, her voice carrying through the translation devices that every ambassador wore. For the past 50 years, my people have studied the humans of Earth. We have read their literature. We have watched their films. We have analyzed their history. And we have reached a conclusion. She pressed a button, and a holographic display appeared above her head. It showed images of human soldiers crying. It showed crowds marching with signs that said "No more war." It showed hospitals filled with men and women who could not stop shaking, who woke up screaming from nightmares. Humans are afraid of war, Voran said. Not in the way that sensible beings avoid unnecessary conflict. They are deeply, psychologically damaged by it. Their soldiers return from battle broken in mind and spirit. Their societies spend generations trying to heal from even small conflicts. Their entire culture is filled with warnings against violence. The ambassadors murmured among themselves. The Thesari were known for their research. If they said something was true, it usually was. We have a term for this in human psychology, Voran continued. They call it trauma. War traumatizes humans in ways that other species do not experience. A human who fights in a war is never the same afterward. They carry the weight of it forever. She changed the image. Now it showed human peace movements throughout history. Thousands of people holding candles, millions signing petitions, entire generations refusing to fight. Because of this fear, humans have developed a strong cultural resistance to warfare. They protest against it. They write songs condemning it. They create art showing its horrors. In their hearts, humans want nothing more than to avoid conflict entirely. Ambassador Voran looked directly at the human section of the hall. Only 3 humans sat there. The rest of humanity's diplomatic team was spread across various offices and stations. They were still new to galactic politics. They were still learning. My recommendation to this council is simple, Voran said. Humans should be designated a protected species. They are too psychologically fragile for military obligations. They should be limited to trade, cultural exchange, and scientific cooperation. We should not expect them to contribute to the defense of the Concord. It would be cruel to ask beings who suffer so much from violence to participate in it. The vote was quick. 43 species voted in favor. 2 abstained. 2 voted against, but only because they thought the designation did not go far enough. In the gallery above the main floor, Captain Elena Vasquez watched the proceedings. She was 47 years old. Her black hair was streaked with gray. Her uniform was simple and clean. She had served in Earth's space fleet for 25 years, and she had seen things that would give the Thesari ambassador nightmares for 100 lifetimes. Next to her sat Commander David Okonkwo, her first officer. He was younger, but his eyes held the same weight. They think we're weak, he said quietly. No, Vasquez replied. They think they understand us. That's worse. She watched as Ambassador Voran accepted congratulations from her colleagues. The Thesari genuinely believed they were helping humanity. They thought they were protecting a fragile species from harm. They had no idea what they were looking at. Humans did fear war. Voran was right about that. But she had made a terrible mistake in her reasoning. She had seen the fear and assumed it meant weakness. She had seen the trauma and assumed it meant fragility. She had seen the peace movements and assumed they meant humans could not fight. She had not asked the most important question. Why did humans fear war so much? The answer was simple. Humans feared war because they remembered what happened when they stopped fearing it. They feared war because they knew exactly what they were capable of. They feared war because, deep in their genes, they carried the memory of every battlefield, every genocide, every moment when human beings had turned into something monstrous. Humans did not fear war because they were prey. They feared war because they were predators who had learned, through thousands of years of bloodshed, to keep themselves on a leash. The Thesari had studied human trauma. They had not studied human history. They had not looked closely at the numbers. They had not realized that humans had killed more of their own kind than most species had members. They had not understood that human peace movements existed because humans knew, with absolute certainty, what would happen if they let themselves go. Vasquez stood up. The vote was over. There was nothing she could do about it now. Humanity would accept the protected species designation because it did not matter. Earth had not survived this long by arguing with people who underestimated them. "Come on," she said to Okonkwo. "We have reports to file." They left the gallery and walked through the long corridors of the Concorde station. Aliens of every shape and size passed them. Some looked at the humans with something like pity. Others ignored them entirely. To most of the galaxy, humans were a curiosity, a young species with strange customs and fragile minds. None of them knew about the First Fleet, 400 warships, hidden in the asteroid belt beyond Mars. Ships that had been built in secret over 2 centuries. Ships that were never meant to be used unless everything else failed. Ships crewed by men and women who had trained their entire lives for a war they hoped would never come. Humanity had joined the Galactic Concorde in good faith. They wanted peace. They genuinely, desperately wanted peace. But they were not stupid. They had read the histories of the galaxy. They knew that peace never lasted forever. They knew that somewhere, sometime, something would come that could not be reasoned with, so they prepared. Quietly, carefully, without telling anyone, 3 weeks after the vote, a small ship dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Sol system. It was not from any species the Concorde recognized. Its design was angular and harsh. Its hull was scarred from countless battles. The ship scanned Earth's defenses. It counted the patrol vessels. It measured the orbital stations. It noted the complete absence of heavy weapons platforms. Then it transmitted a single message back to wherever it came from. The message was intercepted by human intelligence services within seconds. It took another hour to decode. When the translation came through, Captain Vasquez read it in her quarters aboard the Prometheus. The message said, "We have found the weak ones." Vasquez set down the report. She walked to her window and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, something was coming. Something that had seen the Concorde's assessment of humanity and believed it. Something that thought humans would be easy prey. She almost felt sorry for them. Almost. She picked up her communicator and opened a channel to Earth Command. "This is Vasquez," she said. "We need to talk about the First Fleet. I think it's time to wake them up." The stars continued to shine, cold and indifferent. The galaxy continued to spin, and humanity, the species that feared war more than any other, began to prepare for the one thing they had always known was coming. They had tried so hard to avoid this. They had hoped so desperately that it would never happen. But hope was not a strategy, and fear, properly channeled, was the most powerful weapon in the universe. The aliens thought humans were afraid of war. They were right. They just did not understand what that meant. Number, the mistake. The first bombs fell on Thesari Prime at dawn. The sky turned orange and red as warships descended through the clouds. They came in waves, hundreds at a time, blocking out the light of the twin suns. The people in the streets looked up and did not understand what they were seeing. The Thesari had not fought a war in 6,000 years. They had forgotten what invasion looked like. Ambassador Kethala Vorin was in her home when the attack began. She heard the explosions in the distance. She felt the ground shake beneath her feet. She ran to her window and saw her city burning. The Kreth had come. No one in the Galactic Concorde had taken the Kreth hegemony seriously. They were a distant empire, far beyond the borders of civilized space. They were known to be aggressive, but they had never attacked a Concorde member before. The Concorde had believed that its size and unity would protect it. They were wrong. 3,000 Kreth warships surrounded Thesari Prime within hours. The Thesari defense fleet, such as it was, lasted less than 30 minutes. Their ships were old. Their weapons were outdated. Their crews had never seen real combat. They died bravely, but they died quickly. Vorin watched from her window as Kreth landing craft descended on her city. Soldiers poured out, tall and armored, their weapons cutting down anyone who resisted. The Thesari had no army to speak of. Their police force tried to fight back, but they were not trained for this. They were not equipped for this. Within 6 hours, the planetary capital was under Kreth control. Vorin managed to reach an emergency broadcast station. Her hands were shaking as she activated the quantum link to the Galactic Concord. Her face appeared on screens across the galaxy, covered in dust and tears. "Please," she said. "We need help. The Kreeth are killing us. Our cities are burning. Our people are dying. Please, someone help us." The Concord Council met in emergency session. Ambassadors shouted at each other. Some called for immediate military action. Others argued for diplomacy. Most simply did not know what to do. The Concord had maintained peace for so long that none of them remembered how to wage war. The debates went on for hours. Meanwhile, more Thesari cities fell. More people died. The Kreeth did not negotiate. They did not make demands. They simply conquered. On Earth, the United Parliament watched the broadcasts from Thesari Prime. They saw the burning buildings. They heard the screams. They watched as alien soldiers executed civilians in the streets. The debate in Parliament lasted less than 20 minutes. When the vote was called, every single representative raised their hand. Every political party, every nation, every faction. For the first time in human history, humanity spoke with one voice. Earth declared war on the Kreeth hegemony. The announcement shocked the galaxy. The other Concord species could not believe it. Humans were supposed to be the fragile ones. Humans were supposed to be afraid. Why would they volunteer for a war that had nothing to do with them? Admiral James Chen addressed the Concord via quantum link. He was 63 years old, with white hair and a calm face. He had spent his entire career preparing for this moment, hoping it would never come. "Distinguished members of the Concord," he said, "I know you are confused. I know you believe that humans fear war too much to fight. You were right. We do fear war. We fear it more than you can possibly understand." He paused. The entire galaxy was listening. "But you made a mistake," he continued. "You thought our fear made us weak. You thought it meant we would not fight. You did not ask why we are so afraid." His voice grew harder. His eyes grew cold. "We fear war because we remember what we become when we stop fearing it. We fear war because we know, better than any species in this galaxy, what happens when we let ourselves go. Our history is written in blood. Our past is filled with horrors that would break your minds to contemplate. We have done terrible things to each other. We have committed atrocities that your languages do not have words for." He leaned forward. "And we remember all of it. Every war, every genocide, every moment when we became monsters. We carry that weight every single day. It is why we try so hard to be peaceful. It is why we build so many safeguards against violence, because we know what we are capable of." His voice dropped to almost a whisper. "You have seen our fear and called us weak. The Kreeth have seen our fear and called us prey. You are both about to learn how wrong you were." He straightened. "The first fleet is already moving. 400 warships that we have kept hidden since we joined your Concord. We hoped we would never need them. We prayed that peace would last forever, but we are not naive. We knew this day might come, and we prepared." The transmission ended. The Concord ambassadors sat in stunned silence. In the asteroid belt beyond Mars, 400 ships powered up their engines for the first time in 2 centuries. They were not the sleek, elegant vessels that other species built. They were brutal and efficient, designed for one purpose only. Their hulls were thick with armor. Their weapons were oversized and devastating. Their crews were men and women who had trained for decades, waiting for a call they hoped would never come. Captain Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge of the UES Prometheus. She looked at the fleet forming around her. Each ship carried the names of battles from human history: Stalingrad, Gettysburg, Normandy, Kursk. Names that meant nothing to aliens but everything to humans. Names that reminded them of what they were capable of. "All ships," she said into her communicator. "This is Prometheus. Set course for Thesari Prime. Maximum speed." 400 voices answered her. 400 crews ready to fight. 400 ships screaming through space toward a battle they had spent their lives preparing for. The Kreeth commander received intelligence reports about the approaching human fleet. He laughed when he read them. 400 ships against 3,000? The humans were not just weak. They were stupid. He had conquered dozens of species. He had never lost a battle. These pathetic creatures would be no different. He ordered his fleet to form a defensive sphere around Thesari Prime. He wanted the humans to see his strength. He wanted them to understand how hopeless their situation was. He expected them to surrender or flee. He did not understand what was coming. On Earth, people watched the news in silence. Families gathered around screens. Workers stopped what they were doing. Everyone knew what was happening. Everyone knew what it meant. For the first time in 200 years, humanity was going to war, and they were terrified, not because they thought they would lose, not because they doubted their fleet. They were terrified because they knew what war would do to them. They knew the cost they were about to pay. They knew that some of the men and women on those ships would not come home. They knew that those who did come home would be changed forever. But they also knew that some things were worth the cost. Some things were worth any price. The Thesari were dying. Innocent people were being slaughtered, and humanity could not stand by and watch. They were afraid. They were always afraid, but they were going anyway, because that was what it meant to be human. The first fleet jumped to faster than light speed. Stars blurred around them. Space itself seemed to bend. And 400 ships full of frightened, determined human beings flew toward the fire. The Kreth thought they were hunting prey. They were about to discover they had woken a predator. Number, the doctrine. The human fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Thesari system. 3,000 Kreth warships waited for them, arranged in a perfect defensive sphere around the planet. The Kreth commander, whose name was Vorkath, watched the human ships appear on his sensors. He counted them. 400. Just as the intelligence reports had said, he smiled. This would be easy. All ships, he ordered. Maintain formation. Let them come to us. We will crush them against our wall. The Kreth had conquered dozens of species using this strategy. Their enemies always fought the same way. They formed lines. They advanced. They tried to match strength against strength, and they always lost. Because the Kreth were stronger, Vorkath expected the humans to do the same thing. He was wrong. Admiral Chen sat on the bridge of his flagship, the UES Sun Tzu. He studied the Kreth formation on his tactical display. He saw exactly what he expected to see. A wall of ships, a display of power, an invitation to a direct confrontation. He had no intention of accepting that invitation. All squadrons, he said calmly, execute Doctrine 7. The human fleet did not advance. Instead, it broke apart. 400 ships split into 40 groups of 10. Each group scattered in a different direction. They spread across the system like seeds carried by the wind. Within minutes, the neat formation that the Kreth sensors had tracked was gone. Instead, there were 40 small threats approaching from 40 different angles. Vorkath frowned. This was unusual. Track them all, he ordered. Destroy any that come within range. But the human ships did not come within range. They stayed at the edges, circling, probing. Small groups would dart forward, fire a few shots, and then retreat before the Kreth could respond. Other groups attacked supply ships that Vorkath had left in the rear. Others targeted sensor platforms. Others simply vanished into the asteroid fields and became invisible. What are they doing? Vorkath demanded. His tactical officer had no answer. No species had ever fought like this before. The rules of galactic warfare were simple. You formed your fleet. You faced your enemy. You fought until one side was destroyed. That was how it had always been done. The humans had not read those rules. Captain Vasquez commanded a squadron of 10 destroyers. Her mission was simple. Find the Kreth flagship. Do not attack it directly. Just find it and mark its position for the rest of the fleet. She wove her ships through the chaos of battle. Kreth warships fired at her, but she was never where they expected her to be. She used asteroids for cover. She used debris from destroyed ships. She used the planet's magnetic field to hide her sensor signature. She moved like a ghost. There, her sensor officer said. The big one in the center. That's their command ship. Vasquez smiled. Mark it. Send the coordinates to Admiral Chen. Then let's go make some noise somewhere else. Her squadron vanished into the darkness. The Kreth never knew she had been there. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Yuki Tanaka led a flight of interceptors against a Kreth carrier group. Her ships were small and fast. The Kreth carriers were huge and slow. It should have been an unfair fight. It was, just not in the direction the Kreth expected. Tanaka's interceptors struck from above and below simultaneously. They targeted engines and weapon systems. They did not try to destroy the carriers outright. They just crippled them, left them drifting, and moved on to the next target. Behind them, the disabled carriers floated helplessly. unable to launch fighters, unable to flee. Good work, Tanaka told her pilots. Next target. Keep moving. They kept moving. They never stopped moving. That was the doctrine. Never let the enemy pin you down. Never fight on their terms. Always attack where they are weak. Always retreat before they can respond. Vorkath watched his fleet fall apart. Ships were burning everywhere. His communications were jammed. His sensors were blinded. His carefully maintained formation had become a scattered mess of confusion and fire. How is this happening? He screamed at his officers. They only have 400 ships, but it did not feel like 400 ships. It felt like 4,000. Every time his forces tried to concentrate on one threat, 2 more appeared somewhere else. Every time they destroyed a human ship, 3 more attacks came from unexpected directions. The humans were everywhere and nowhere. They struck and vanished. They killed and disappeared. Admiral Chen watched the battle from his flagship. His face was calm, but his hands were tight on the arms of his chair. He had studied Kreth tactics for 30 years. He knew exactly how they fought. He knew their strengths and their weaknesses, and he had built his entire strategy around one simple truth. The Kreth did not know how to adapt. They had conquered so many species by being stronger. They had never needed to be clever. They had never needed to change their tactics mid-battle. They simply overwhelmed their enemies with numbers and firepower. Humans had spent 10,000 years fighting each other. They had learned, through endless bloodshed, that strength alone was not enough. They had developed the art of asymmetric warfare. They had learned to use terrain, and timing, and deception. They had learned to make a small force fight like a large one. The Kreth were stronger, but humans were smarter. Admiral, his tactical officer reported. Enemy flagship located. Coordinates confirmed. Chen nodded. Signal all stealth destroyers. Execute final phase. 12 ships had been hiding in the shadow of Thesari's moon for the past 3 hours. They were the smallest ships in the human fleet, but they carried the heaviest weapons. Nuclear warheads, antimatter charges, things that humans had hoped they would never need to use again. The stealth destroyers moved silently through the chaos of battle. The Kreth did not see them coming. Their sensors were overwhelmed. Their attention was scattered across 40 different threats. They never noticed the 12 small ships sliding through their formation like knives in the dark. Lieutenant Tanaka's interceptor was hit during the final phase. Her engines were destroyed. Her weapons were gone. Her ship was drifting toward the Kreth flagship, pulled by its gravity. She had a choice. She could eject and hope someone would rescue her, or she could do something else. She thought about her daughter back on Earth. She thought about the Thesari civilians dying on the planet below. She thought about what it meant to be human. She aimed her broken ship at the Kreth flagship's engine core. She pushed her remaining thrusters to maximum, and she opened a channel to the fleet. "Tell my daughter I chose this," she said. "Tell her I was not afraid." Her ship struck the flagship at full speed. The explosion tore through the engine section. The Kreth command ship lost power. Its shields failed, and then the stealth destroyers fired. 12 nuclear weapons struck the flagship simultaneously. It vanished in a ball of white fire. The Kreth fleet, suddenly without leadership, fell into chaos. Ships began to retreat. Others surrendered. Others fought on blindly until they were destroyed. The battle lasted another 6 hours, but the outcome was decided in that moment. When it was over, 1,847 Kreth ships were destroyed or disabled. The human fleet had lost 112 ships. The Thesari homeworld was free. Ambassador Vorin was pulled from the rubble of her capital city by human marines. She looked up at Captain Vasquez, who had led the ground rescue team personally. Her 4 eyes were wide with shock. "How?" she whispered. "You were supposed to be afraid." Vasquez helped her stand. Her face was tired and sad. "We are afraid," she said. "That's why we're so good at this. Fear makes us prepare. Fear makes us think. Fear makes us train until we can fight in our sleep. We don't win despite our fear. We win because of it." She looked up at the sky, where human ships were establishing a defensive perimeter around the planet. "We spent 10,000 years learning how to kill each other," she said quietly. "We got very, very good at it. And then we learned to be afraid of what we had become. That fear is the only thing that keeps us human." She turned back to Vorin. "The Kreth thought our fear was weakness. They were wrong. Our fear is what makes us strong." Vorin had no answer. She simply stood in the ruins of her city and watched the humans save her people. She had called them weak. She had called them fragile. She had been so sure she understood them. She understood nothing. The reckoning. The war lasted 18 months. 18 months of burning ships and broken bodies. 18 months of battles that would be remembered for 10,000 years. 18 months that changed the galaxy forever. Humanity did not just defend Thesari Prime. They took the war to the Kreeth. They pushed into enemy territory. They liberated conquered worlds. They dismantled the hegemony piece by piece, system by system. The Galactic Concord watched in stunned silence. They had expected humans to defend and retreat. They had expected a holding action, a delay while the other species gathered their forces. They had not expected an invasion. Admiral Chen planned every campaign personally. He did not sleep more than 4 hours a night. He studied maps and reports until his eyes burned. He sent men and women to die, and he felt every single loss like a knife in his heart. But he did not stop. "We cannot let them recover," he told his officers. "If we give them time, they will rebuild. They will come back stronger. We have to end this now, while we have the advantage." The humans pushed deeper into Kreeth space. They captured supply stations. They destroyed shipyards. They cut communication lines. The hegemony, which had seemed so powerful, began to crumble. Commander Marcus Webb led the ground campaigns. He was a large man with a shaved head and kind eyes. He had been a teacher before he joined the military. Sometimes, in quiet moments, he still thought about the children he had taught. He wondered what they would think of him now. His Marines fought from planet to planet. They cleared cities building by building. They faced Kreeth soldiers who were taller, stronger, and more numerous. They won anyway. But Webb gave his troops one rule that could never be broken. "We are not monsters," he told them before every battle. "We fight soldiers. We protect civilians. We treat prisoners with respect. I don't care how angry you are. I don't care how many friends you've lost. If you commit an atrocity, I will personally put you on trial." Understood? His Marines understood. On the planet Korath, Webb's forces captured a Kreeth fortress. 3,000 enemy soldiers surrendered. Webb's Marines were exhausted and wounded. They had lost a quarter of their unit taking that fortress. Some of them wanted revenge. Webb stood between his troops and the prisoners. "No," he said simply. "They surrendered. They are no longer enemies. They are our responsibility." He ordered his medics to treat wounded Kreeth soldiers alongside wounded humans. He set up a prisoner camp with clean water and adequate food. He allowed Kreeth officers to keep their dignity. A captured Kreeth general named Thorvak demanded to speak with him. Webb agreed. "Why?" Thorvak asked. His voice was confused and angry. "Your soldiers died taking this fortress. We killed them. Why do you show us mercy?" Webb sat down across from him. He was tired. He was always tired these days. "Because when this war is over, you will still exist," he said. "Your species will still be here. Your children will grow up knowing what happened, and I want them to remember that humans could have been monsters. We could have killed every prisoner. We could have burned your cities. We could have done to you what you did to the Thesari." He leaned forward. "But we chose not to. We chose to be better. Not because you deserve it, but because we have to live with ourselves after this is over. Our fear of war is not just fear of dying. It is fear of what we become when we let ourselves go. We are fighting that fear every single day of this campaign." Thorvak stared at him for a long time. "You are strange creatures," he finally said. "Yes," Webb agreed. "We are." The war continued. Human forces pushed deeper into Kreeth territory. They liberated species that had been conquered centuries ago. They found slave camps and freed the prisoners. They found mass graves and documented the crimes. They broadcast everything to the entire galaxy. The other conquered species began to understand. They watched humans fight with terrible efficiency, and then stop to help wounded enemies. They watched human soldiers weep over fallen comrades, and then share food with captured prisoners. They watched humans destroy Kreeth military targets and then rebuild civilian infrastructure. This was not the behavior of a weak species. This was not the behavior of creatures too fragile for war. This was something else entirely. Ambassador Vorin traveled with the human fleet as an observer. She wanted to understand what she had gotten so wrong. She watched battle after battle. She interviewed human soldiers and officers. She studied their tactics and their customs. One night, She found Captain Vasquez alone on an observation deck, staring at the stars. "May I ask you something?" Vorin said. Vasquez nodded. "Your soldiers fight like demons," Vorin said. "They are the most effective warriors I have ever seen, but when the battle is over, they become gentle. They help the wounded. They mourn the dead, even enemy dead. How is this possible? How can the same beings be so deadly and so compassionate?" Vasquez was quiet for a long moment. "Do you know why humans invented the concept of war crimes?" she finally asked. Vorin shook her head. "Because we needed rules to stop ourselves. We needed laws to prevent our worst impulses. We created tribunals and courts and international agreements because we knew that without them, we would become something terrible. Our compassion after battle is not separate from our deadliness in battle. They come from the same place. We fight hard because we care, and we show mercy because we know what happens when we don't." She turned to face Vorin. "Every human soldier carries two voices in their head. One tells them to destroy their enemies completely. The other tells them to remember their humanity. The war is not just against the Kreth. The war is inside us. Every single moment. We fight the enemy. We fight ourselves. We fight to stay human." Vorin did not know what to say. "You called us weak," Vasquez continued. "You thought our fear made us fragile. But our fear is what keeps us sane. It is the voice that says stop when we want to keep killing. It is the voice that says enough when we want revenge. Without that fear, we would be worse than the Kreth. We would be unstoppable, and we would hate ourselves forever." In the final months of the war, Earth established war crimes tribunals. Human soldiers who had committed atrocities were prosecuted. Officers who had allowed violations were removed from command. The galaxy had never seen anything like it. No species had ever held itself accountable during a war. Some of the other Concord species thought this was weakness. They thought humans were undermining their own military by punishing successful soldiers. They did not understand. Humans prosecuted war criminals because it was the only way to remain human. They punished their own because the alternative was becoming the very thing they were fighting against. Every trial was a reminder that there were lines that could never be crossed. Every conviction was a promise that humanity would not lose itself in the darkness. The Kreth Supreme Commander requested a meeting with Admiral Chen. His name was Gorthak, and he had ruled the hegemony for 50 years. He had never lost a war. Now his empire was falling apart around him. They met on a neutral station. Gorthak was huge, nearly 8 feet tall, with armor-plated skin and eyes like black stones. Chen was small by comparison, an old man with white hair and tired eyes. "What are you?" Gorthak demanded. "We studied your species. We saw your fear. We thought you would be easy prey. How were we so wrong?" Chen sat down. He poured himself a cup of tea. He took a sip before answering. "You saw our fear and thought it was weakness," he said. "But fear is not weakness. Fear is wisdom. We fear war because we have seen what it does. We fear ourselves because we know what we can become. Our fear does not make us less dangerous. It makes us more careful. It makes us prepare. It makes us train until we can defeat enemies twice our size." He set down his cup. "You should have been afraid of us," he said quietly. "Not because we are strong, but because we are afraid. And there is nothing more dangerous than a frightened human, with nothing left to lose." Gorthak had no answer. The war ended 3 months later. The Kreth hegemony surrendered. Their empire was reduced to 3 systems. They were not destroyed. They were not enslaved. They were simply contained. Humanity had won. And they had done it without becoming monsters. But the cost had been high. 112 ships lost in the first battle. Thousands more over 18 months. Tens of thousands of human soldiers dead. Hundreds of thousands more wounded in body and mind. Vasquez thought about Lieutenant Tanaka every night. She thought about all the names that would never come home. She thought about the families who would never be whole again. This was why humans feared war. This was the price they knew they would pay. They had paid it anyway, because some things were worth any cost, but they would never forget what it had cost them. They would never stop being afraid. The legacy. 5 years passed. The galaxy healed slowly. Worlds that had burned under Kreth occupation began to rebuild. Species that had lost everything began to find hope again. The scars remained, but life continued. The Galactic Concord met to restructure itself. The old ways had failed. 12,000 years of peace had left the member species unprepared for real danger. They needed something new. They needed protection that did not depend on hope and good intentions. Ambassador Vorin stood before the council. Her blue skin was marked now with the silver lines that showed age among her people. She had spent the past 5 years studying humanity. She had lived among them. She had learned their history. She had finally begun to understand. "Distinguished members," she said. "5 years ago, I stood in this very hall and called humanity a weak species. I said they were too afraid of war to be useful. I recommended they be designated as protected, shielded from military obligations." She paused. The hall was silent. "I was wrong. I have never been more wrong about anything in my life." She pressed a button, and images appeared above her head. Human soldiers fighting on Thesari Prime. Human ships burning in the darkness of space. Human medics treating wounded Kreeth prisoners. Human tribunals prosecuting their own war criminals. Humans fear war, Vorin continued. "This is true, but I misunderstood what that fear means. I thought it was weakness. It is not. It is wisdom earned through thousands of years of bloodshed. Humans fear war because they remember every terrible thing they have ever done to each other. They fear war because they know exactly what they are capable of." She changed the image. Now it showed Admiral Chen's final address after the war. His tired face, his quiet voice, his words that had been broadcast to every corner of the galaxy. "And, because they fear it," Vorin said, "they prepare for it better than any species I have ever seen. They train harder. They think deeper. They plan more carefully. Their fear does not make them run. It makes them ready." She turned to face the human delegation. Admiral Chen was there, retired now but still present for important occasions. Captain Vasquez sat beside him, her hair fully gray after 5 years of rebuilding operations. Other human representatives filled the section. Men and women who had survived the war and carried its weight every day. "I recommend," Vorin said, "that humanity be given leadership of the new defensive coalition. Not because they are the strongest fighters, not because they have the most ships, but because they understand something that the rest of us forgot. They understand the cost of war. They understand that victory means nothing if you lose yourself in the process." The vote was not close. 45 species voted in favor. 2 abstained. None voted against. Humanity, the youngest species in the Concord, the species that had been called weak and fragile and afraid, became the protector of the galaxy. Admiral Chen was asked to give a final address. He walked slowly to the speaking platform. He was 70 years old now. His body was tired. His heart was heavy with the weight of every life lost under his command. But his voice was still strong. "Distinguished members of the Concord," he began, "you have given us a great responsibility. We will do our best to be worthy of it. But I want you to understand something important." He looked across the hall. Thousands of alien eyes looked back at him. "You thought we feared war because we were prey. But we feared it because we were predators who learned to leash ourselves. Every human carries something dark inside them. Call it violence. Call it rage. Call it the wolf in our hearts. We have spent 10,000 years learning not to let it out." He paused. "When the Kreeth attacked, you saw what happens when the leash slips. You saw humans fight with a ferocity that terrified you. You saw us destroy an empire that had conquered dozens of worlds. You saw us do things that no peaceful species should be capable of." His voice grew softer. "And then you saw us put the leash back on. You saw us treat prisoners with dignity. You saw us prosecute our own soldiers for crimes. You saw us rebuild instead of conquer. You saw us choose to remain human when we could have become monsters." He straightened. "That is what our fear means. It is not weakness. It is the thing that keeps us sane. It is the voice that tells us to stop when every instinct screams to keep going. It is the memory of every terrible thing we have ever done and the promise that we will not do it again." He looked at the human delegation. At Vasquez, who had lost so many friends. At the young officers who would carry this burden into the future. At the representatives of a species that had been feared and dismissed and underestimated. "We will protect this Concord," Chen said. "We will stand between you and any threat that comes. We will fight and bleed and die if necessary. Because that is what you have asked us to do. Because that is who we are." His voice dropped. "But remember this. We will never stop being afraid. We will never stop carrying the weight of what we have done and what we might do. We will never stop fighting the darkness inside ourselves." He raised his head. That is our gift to you. Not our strength, not our ships, not our tactics. Our gift is that we will always, always choose to remain human. No matter how hard it gets, no matter how much it costs, no matter how easy it would be to let go. He stepped back from the platform. Remember that, the next time someone tells you humans are weak. The hall was silent for a long moment. Then, for the first time in Concord history, every species rose in unified applause. The sound filled the crystal walls. It echoed through the mile-long chamber. It carried out into the stars. Later that night, Admiral Vasquez stood at the viewport of humanity's new flagship. They had named it the UES Yuki Tanaka, after the pilot who had sacrificed herself to destroy the Kreth command ship. Every flagship would carry the name of someone who had died in service of humanity. That was the tradition now. That was how they remembered. Earth rose in the distance, blue and fragile against the blackness of space. Vasquez watched it turn slowly. She thought about all the people down there living their lives, children going to school, workers going to jobs, families eating dinner together, all of them protected by the fleet that circled above them. They did not think about war. They did not carry its weight. That was the gift that soldiers gave to civilians. The gift of peace, bought with blood and sacrifice and fear. Commander Okonkwo joined her at the viewport. He was an admiral himself now, her second in command. His hair had gone gray, too. They had both grown old in service of something larger than themselves. "What are you thinking?" he asked. Vasquez was quiet for a moment. "I'm thinking about Tanaka," she said. "I'm thinking about Chen. I'm thinking about everyone we lost. And I'm thinking about everyone we saved." She turned to face him. "The Thesari are rebuilding. The species the Kreth conquered are free. The galaxy is at peace, not because we were strong, but because we were afraid enough to do it right." Okonkwo nodded. "We're still afraid," Vasquez said quietly. "That's the point. The day we stop being afraid is the day we become something terrible. Our fear is what makes us human." She looked back at Earth. "The galaxy misunderstood us," she said. "They saw our fear and thought it was weakness. They didn't understand that fear, properly channeled, is the most powerful force in the universe. It drives us to prepare. It drives us to fight. And it drives us to remember why we're fighting in the first place." She touched the viewport. Earth's light shone through her fingers. "We fear war because we love peace. We fight because there are things worth protecting. And we remain human because we never, ever forget the cost." Okonkwo stood beside her in silence. Outside, the stars continued to shine. The galaxy continued to spin. And humanity, the species that feared war more than any other, stood guard over a peace they had bought with blood and tears and 10,000 years of hard-won wisdom. They had proven everyone wrong, not because they were fearless, but because they had learned to make their fear into a weapon. The galaxy had called them weak. The galaxy had been wrong, and humanity would spend the rest of eternity making sure that peace remained, not because they were unafraid, but because they were so very, very afraid of what would happen if they failed. That fear was their strength. That fear was their legacy. That fear was what made them human.